Welcome into the Women's Basketball Podcast. College basketball season is underway. WNBA expansion is here, and we've got the lowdown on everything women's basketball here in the continental United States and maybe even beyond. Mia O'Brien, joined as I am each and every week by the one and only Mitchell Northam. Mitch, we were just discussing our AP poll ballots on both the men's and the women's side. You've got people yelling at you online. I've got the Pitt Panther fans coming out of the woodwork for me. Excited to talk about all that, as well as this past week's slate of games and what's to come.
Yeah, it's been a fun Monday here as I fend off angry Kentucky men's basketball fans. And last week, the Kentucky fans kind of loved me because, I picked them to upset North Carolina. And how did that go? Didn't go well. So on the women's side. So, yeah, we're in the middle of the season. It feels like everybody's beating everybody on the men and women's side. But, yeah, another fun week of women's college basketball for sure.
This upcoming Saturday, I feel like as much as we said the official start of college basketball was the first week of the season in November, then we said feast week. I believe it's this weekend because Army-Navy, which I know obviously means a lot to you growing up in that neck of the woods and your affiliation with that game. But at the same time, I feel like with the championship weekend of college football behind us, we do have that 1 week layoff before the playoff gets going. This feels like the weekend for so many of you that you are turning your attention to see what's going on in the world of college basketball. And that's what we're here for, to give you the lowdown and catch you up on what you may have missed. Let's begin, Mitch, as we do each and every week with our Her of the Week. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to toss this one to you, toss it back at myself if you may. I just want to pick one of the LSU big three. I will go with Michaela Williams. She dropped 35 against Stanford in an overtime win. Then LSU goes to Grambling State. They played in Grambling State in Michaela Williams' hometown. Her high school retired her number at this game. An awesome week for her. Kevin Durant actually talked about her on Twitter, and she seemed very, very excited to hear that Michaela Williams apparently has the purest shot in college basketball, according to Kevin Durant. And so good on Michaela, but at the same time, Flau'jae Johnson and Anissa Morrow also both went off this week.
Yeah, by the time our listeners hear this, they will see that Michaela Williams is one of our players of the week for the USBWA this week. And yeah, she was just awesome in that game against Stanford. 32 points, like you mentioned, also 9 rebounds, shot 5 of 9 from three-point land. But yeah, I mean, this is really like an LSU team that I think is emerging to, they have that big three, right, of Michaela, Flau'jae, and Anissa Morrow, but then you have someone like Kaylin Gilbert coming off the bench, scoring 25 points. So yeah, they're on a tear right now. They're still undefeated. They haven't played a super tough schedule, but they have won the games in front of them. They beat Stanford, they beat NC State, Washington. So, the Power Four teams that they have played against, they've come out on the other side okay. I think when they get into SEC play, we'll learn a little bit more about them. But yeah, LSU off to a great start in the post Angel Reese era for sure.
And Kim Mulkey is still swinging her arms. I saw our friends at One Shining Podcast by the Ringer Network. They couldn't wait to zoom in on the video as she's celebrating and literally looks like she's going to deck an assistant coach or someone in row one. So, hey, Kim Mulkey, if you want to be Her of the Week, we know you want to be the main character. We will allow you to have that this week.
Yeah, I need Kim Mulkey to, I feel like once we get into SEC play is when she really starts kind of going out with the outfits. I remember there was a game last year where she wore like a rainbow shirt, but it also had literally like a Coca-Cola ad on it or something. So maybe we'll get that again. Maybe we'll get some feathers.
Maybe Pepsi got mad and they swooped in and said, we'll give you the full Pepsi suit. You
Pepsi up your game. Yeah,
right,
drop
exactly.
the bag. Yeah,
exactly. Because the Kim Mulkey walking advertisement is for all to see. She is the show, and so is her Tigers squad. Let's head over to our starting five, our recap of the 5 biggest games and characters this past week in women's college basketball. Mitch, you texted me over the weekend. You said you have some apologies to dish out. The floor is yours, sir, as we begin this week's starting 5.
Yeah. So Tennessee and North Carolina. My bad. I got it wrong. Tennessee, I want to start with their game against Iowa, which was just wild. Some of like
Great
the
game. I mean,
stats.
we'll get into it, but it was overall, it was a truly great basketball game. One of the best basketball games we had this weekend.
Yeah, and I was locked into college football on Saturday, conference championship and stuff, but I switched over to this one, a couple of times, kind of flipping back and forth. And then I kept it on for most of the fourth quarter. But, after the game, I'm looking at the box score and stuff, and I looked up a couple stats. So it was the first time that Iowa had turned the ball over 30 times in one game since 2002. So you go 22 years without that many turnovers. So, Tennessee does that against Iowa, but it's not the first time they've done that this season. So it's the first time that Tennessee has forced at least 30 turnovers in at least 3 games in a single season since 2007, 2008, that season at Tennessee, which I believe ended in a national championship for Tennessee, one of Pat Summitt's great teams. So yeah, the Vols are legit. I said on last week's podcast that they ain't played nobody yet, which, I mean, to be honest, they hadn't really played anybody yet, but they go out this week and they beat, a good Florida State team, and they beat a really good Iowa team. And they do it with defense. And I think it's kind of proof of concept early on here that Kim Caldwell's system can work at this level. I know a lot of people had a lot of questions about, okay, you did this at the lower level, you did this at Marshall, can you do it in the SEC? And I think that we're seeing early on the returns are pretty good. They can do this in the SEC. They rank 3rd right now in points per game nationally. They rank 11th in offensive rating. They're just playing really awesome, frankly. They're also 2nd in defensive rebounding rate. So they're turning defense into offense. I think the other player who's been super impressive has been Talijah Cooper, who was awesome in that Iowa game. Ruby Whitehorn, the transfer for Clemson, who has been awesome. I got a text from an ACC coach earlier this season and was like, Ruby Whitehorn looks like a different player at Tennessee. So they're really coming along strong. And then, North Carolina, their win over Kentucky was just not what I expected at all. I remember I said on last week's podcast that
one of our games to watch.
Kenny Brooks was 10-2 against Courtney Banghart's teams. These are 2 coaching staffs who knew each other super, super well. I thought that this game was going to be close. I thought that Kentucky would win in a close game. And then it turns out that North Carolina just put the clamps on Kentucky, and 72-53, like just an astounding performance from North Carolina. They have the number 2 defense in the country right now. They're only allowing 49.1 points per game, which is, like I said, 1st in the ACC, 2nd in the country. They lead the ACC in field goal percentage defense, and they've held 6 opponents this season to their lowest scoring total. So, I know we've had a question sometimes of like, okay, who's the bus driver for this North Carolina team? It might not be a person. It might be an identity. It might be defense. But having said that, Renaya Kelly had an awesome game against Kentucky, 16 points and 6 assists. Maria Gatang had 18 points. So they've had some players step up, when needed to and really lead them. But I think this team, it's really the collective identity of the defense, and they've responded in a big way since losing that game to UConn.
I think the most frustrating part of that game for Kentucky was the bigs and just the poor shooting effort. I mean, Clara Strack finished 2 of 10. It felt like at one point she was like 0 of 8. And I mean, she's trying to get back on the floor then and play defense. And I mean, at some point or another, it has to be disheartening. Georgia Amore also with a 4 of 10 night from the floor. You don't see that happening every night for Kentucky. And so, yeah, ultimately, I think the poor shooting came back to haunt Kentucky, and it's a credit to that UNC defense. Back to the Iowa game briefly, just because of my dog in the fight, if you may, Mitch. 20 of those turnovers came in the first half. I would like to believe this is the outlier. This is not something we're going to see under Jan Jensen with this Iowa team. This is an incredibly, incredibly young Iowa team. And I understand a lot has been made about how perfect Lucy Olson has been inserting into this lineup in place largely of Caitlin Clark, and the fact that she is carrying them in the scoring department with 23 points. She was 9 of 9 from the free throw line, shot 50% from the floor. Like, look, I understand that this is still the Lucy Olson show and the thought of this is a one-person band, but this is going to have to be the sum of the parts, not the parts of the sum when it comes to Iowa basketball in 2024, 2025. You can't have Siddle Falter only take 2 shots in this game. You can't have Hannah Stolke go 1 of 8 from the floor in this game. Then you throw the turnovers in addition to that poor shooting performance, and it's a recipe for disaster. The Hawkeyes went 3 of 14 from beyond the arc, and ultimately, the fact that this was even a one-possession game with 3 minutes to go, let alone the fact that Iowa was leading by 4 with 4 minutes to go in the game, defies the rules of logic. And so I'm glad to see both teams are in the AP top 25 because I do think it's an outlier for the Hawkeyes, but I also think this Tennessee team does deserve your respect, Mitch.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's probably an outlier for Iowa. I don't think we're going to see them turn the ball over 30 times again. But yeah, I mean, I think it speaks to the buy-in that the Tennessee players are giving to Kim Caldwell's system and the way that they've bought in and how aggressive they are on defense. I think this game definitely said more about Tennessee than Iowa. I think, you played this game again in March, it's probably a lot closer. I mean, like you said, it was Iowa led with 4 minutes to go, and then Tennessee just turned the heat up and closed the game on a 14-2 run and kind of pulled away there at the end. So, yeah, like you mentioned, I think, Lucy Olson is the leader and the bus driver for this team. You do get 17 points and 11 from Addie O'Grady in this game. But yeah, you need the other parts of Iowa to kind of step up. And I think they'll bounce back in a big way. We'll talk about, their upcoming opponent here later in the show.
Addie O'Grady, most improved player in the country, many are saying. Speaking of Hawkeyes, let's flip it over to the WNBA for number 2 in this week's starting 5. Yes, we'll take a brief departure from college basketball because arguably one of the biggest stories, if not the biggest story in women's basketball this week, Mitch, the first expansion draft since 2008, the Golden State Valkyries made 11 of 12 possible selections. Bias aside, I don't think this is just because of my previous work covering Iowa, my relationship with those players, and now the Indiana Fever with Caitlin Clark. I was most surprised, and I think most of the viewing audience was most surprised that Kate Martin and Temi Fabangeli were both made available during the expansion draft and were selected by the Valkyries. It's a no-brainer if you're Golden State. You obviously were going to take those 2 players, but those, I think, were the 2 biggest shockers on expansion draft Friday night.
Yeah, I think there was a question as to, with the Las Vegas Aces, everybody got to pick, protect 6 players, I think it was. So, the 5 for the Aces are pretty obvious. They're stars, Asia Wilson, Chelsea Gray, Kelsey Plum, Jackie Young, and then, probably Clark. And then
also, by the way, did I say I'm butchering Temi's name here. It's Fag Benlay. I don't know why I'm saying Fag. There must be another player. Anyways, I digress. Want to make sure we got that correct. Continue.
Apologies to Temi. We'll just, refer to her
best
as our
British
first
accent in all of sports, by the way. Continue, Mitch.
But yeah, so I think there's a lot of questions as to like, okay, well, who is the 6th player that the Aces are going to protect? Was it going to be Kate Martin? Was it going to be? I'm not sure if we actually know who the protected players were. I don't think that was actually revealed. But Kate Martin was not protected, and I think anybody would have selected her this year. Sort of given the choices, and it's an incredible story for her going from she just shows up to the draft last year to cheer on Caitlin Clark, and then she ends up getting picked in the 2nd round and turns into as far as 2nd round picks in the WNBA draft go, one of the best players probably selected in the 2nd round last year. Has a really strong rookie season for the Aces, has a couple standout games. And now she's going, she's early on here, the face of the franchise for the Golden State Valkyries until, they make their moves in free agency or whatever you have. But yeah, I thought that was a great pick by them. Temi, of course, obviously a really great pick. A lot of people were surprised that and I'm going to butcher her last name, so apologies in advance. But the Dallas Wings,
someone else. Oh, okay.
Someone else, yeah. The Dallas Wings guard from France, who actually didn't play in the W last year. Carla Liate, I think is her name, is how you say it. She was the MVP of a FIBA tournament in 2023. And a lot of people had like high hopes for her, maybe pairing her up with Paige Beckers next year for the Dallas Wings in the backcourt. And the Wings left her unprotected. So she goes to the Valkyries. We'll see if she comes to the WNBA next year. So I liked how the Valkyries took a couple flyers like that on, hey, here's a really good player who's overseas who might not come this year, hasn't come over yet. Maybe they come over, they see an opportunity to play with us. Maybe it works out. So they did that a couple times. They got a couple really good vets too. And Kayla Thornton, who's been in the league a while, Monique Billings, who has been around. And then Julie Van Loo, who, was one of the older rookies in the league last year, but was really a great player for the Washington Mystics and had a solid Olympics for her country as well. So I liked what the Valkyries did in the draft, and now just curious to see what they do in free agency and the college draft, of course.
Yeah, I was very impressed with how they handled this draft. I think what's going to be more interesting, and to our point, that I don't think we'll ever know which players were protected and which players were not. I think the strategy behind certain teams versus others. You have the Washington Mystics making one of their premier younger players made available, and someone who wasn't just a Kate Martin glue guy in Las Vegas like she was last year. It was a player who was a starter for you. Not that Kate Martin didn't start 2 games for the Aces last year, because she did. However, let's be real, that's a younger player in Washington, and Kate Martin's a younger player. And so that says to me that Becky Hammond and company protected their veteran superstars, despite the fact that they will incur quite a cap number in the coming years, which we, of course, don't know what the cap situation will fully be in the WNBA in 2 years' time. But then you also look on the other side, you have the Indiana Fever, who see a 32-year-old Teme, and they say, you know what? History of injuries, we can go out and draft another front court player to play alongside our big 2, big 3, depending on how you view Kelsey Mitchell's standing with the Indiana Fever. And that's okay. There were a lot of people who wondered if NaLyssa Smith, because of her, if only on social media, visible frustration with the franchise, if she would be exposed in the expansion draft. But ultimately, I view her as a a trade piece for the Indiana Fever, because she's 26 years old. Or 25, 26 years old. And so therefore she's under contract. She's going to command more than Teme would have. And so you can actually get something in return, as opposed to just having her get scooped up in the expansion draft.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but yeah.
So that's why the strategy piece, I wish we knew who's protected and who's not, because I think each club approached it differently.
Yeah, maybe we'll, over the next couple of months here, maybe it'll leak out or something. But yeah, I if that is the case with NaLyssa Smith, I think that's a really smart move by the Fever. Maybe they don't believe that her future is there, but I don't think you can deny that NaLyssa Smith is a good player and could start on some other teams in the WNBA. So yeah, maybe you do view her as a trade piece, somebody you can get for a pick or another solid player, somewhere in the trade market.
You had a bit of a news bomb. We're going to call them Mitch bombs in the WNBA world. Before we get to that, though, let's pivot back to college basketball. Your women's basketball AP poll this week, Mitch. Who are you angering this week after last week? We had to apologize to the UNC and Tennessee fan bases.
Yeah, I don't think I've angered anybody on the women's side yet, but, 2 seasons in a row, I have made the South Carolina fan base angry. So there's still time for that. We'll see how that goes.
We also are going to talk about South Carolina here in just a second too.
Oh, for sure. This week I did bump UConn up to number 1. I just thought the way that they dominated Louisville was super impressive. And so I bumped them from 2-1 over UCLA. I kept UCLA at 2 and South Carolina at 3. So the top 3 remains the same in the overall AP poll. Tennessee, like we mentioned, they're ranked for the first time in a year, which ends their longest drought in program history. They check in at number 19 after beating Florida State and Iowa, like we talked about. Georgia Tech is in the poll. They're still undefeated. And NC State is back in after getting a solid win over Ole Miss and then beating, I believe they beat Old Dominion at home on Sunday. So Illinois, Alabama, Louisville, they are out. I had just like a couple thoughts on the overall poll. I'm not sure why USC and Texas are still ranked ahead of Notre Dame. I kind of think this early in the season, when you only really have like a month of data points to look at, we should value head-to-head results into account, especially when USC doesn't really have like really great wins to balance out that loss to Notre Dame. Texas, they have some good wins, but Notre Dame just beat them this week. Notre Dame beat USC convincingly on its home court. So I know the Irish have those losses to TCU and Utah, but I think ranking the Longhorn and Trojans ahead of them doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. The other one I'm not 100% sold on yet. I don't know why Ohio State is so high at number 11. I had them at number 22 this week. I think the Buckeyes are a good team, but like, who have they beaten? They've played one Power 4 team, Illinois, and they won. Great. But number 11, I don't know. Let's see how you do against Stanford on December 20th. Similarly, I put Nebraska in this boat too. I didn't rank the Cornhuskers. Here's why. You lost to Creighton and you've beaten one Power 4 team in Minnesota. Where are your good wins? Again, let's see how you do against Georgia Tech on December 21st. And my last point is, I don't know why Ole Miss is still ranked.
Because we love Coach Yo. Everyone loves Coach Yo. That's it.
I know. But I get the argument, they played USC, UConn, and NC State really competitively at varying degrees. But at some point, you got to win those games. And Ole Miss's best win to this point is against Boston College on a neutral court. And so, I'm just not sold on Ole Miss. So maybe I've angered Ohio State, Nebraska, and Ole Miss, but I haven't heard from them yet. So we'll see.
Well, what I find interesting, Mitch, is that you want to value the head-to-head of Texas and Notre Dame, which we will also get to that game here in just a second. But on the men's side, you have Duke ranked ahead of Kentucky, despite the fact that Kentucky beat Duke on a neutral court.
I think my difference is that Duke has the really good wins to balance out that loss to Kentucky, whereas USC does not on the women's side.
True.
To Notre Dame. Duke has beaten Arizona and Louisville and Auburn. And it's been a month since that game against Kentucky. It's been, I think, a couple of weeks since Notre Dame went into USC and beat them.
Yeah.
So, once USC beats another really good Power 4 team, if I don't know who the Auburn is on the women's side this year. I don't have USC schedule right in front of me. But I think that's how I'm sorting it out in my head.
I would make the argument that maybe could UCLA be the Auburn of this year? Question mark. Maybe that's something we'll debate at another time.
That's got to be coming up soon, right?
Which we got
USC, UCLA.
Oh, yeah, that has to be coming up because that's a Big Ten game, dude. Come on now. Welcome to the Big Ten. USC plays UCLA not until February 13th, from what I can see, Mitch.
So USC just had their Big Ten opener at Oregon. They won there. They play at UConn on December 21st.
Oh, okay. That's the game you were looking for. Okay. I thought you meant USC, UCLA.
Yeah. No, USC, UCLA is certainly what I'm looking for. Man, they don't play until late in the season, February 13th and March 1st.
They want to round out the Big Ten calendar with that rivalry game.
Yeah. And they get big TV treatments. We got NBC and Fox carrying those games. Cool. Okay. Good deal.
Shout out to the Big Ten. One more from the college ranks as we get ready to round out this week's starting five. I noted on my daily program on 1010XL here in Jacksonville, Helmets and Heels, that I was fading South Carolina, inspired by my friend Mitch, who said, take TCU to cover if they are a double-digit dog against South Carolina. I said, take Duke to cover against the Gamecocks. Take TCU to cover against the Gamecocks. The Blue Devils, to your credit, your team on the rise, Mitch, over the last month in women's college basketball, they met the mark. They stood up to the test. They aced the test. They lose to South Carolina. They cover the spread. 81-70 the final this past Thursday night.
Great teams cover.
Great teams cover, and Duke looks like a great team right now. The fight was there to the point that it looked like the Gamecock players were shocked at the beginning of the fourth quarter that Duke was still fighting and that Duke still had not only the mental fortitude to keep pushing through a 20-point deficit, but also had the fitness to continue to run with South Carolina throughout the duration of this game. And that's a credit to Kara Lawson and her squad. And then Sunday came along, the game that we thought, oh, this team will absolutely cover. They will hang with the Gamecocks. They're one of the hottest teams in the country. You could argue that TCU and Duke have been the two biggest surprises in women's college basketball through the first month of the season. And then Haley Van Lith and company got run out of their own gym, 85-52. What the heck happened? I'm never going to fade South Carolina ever again, Mitch.
Yeah. If you were, trying to make money with Mitch this week, I apologize. My picks were bad and they were wrong. But yeah, South Carolina, TCU, that was just a collective, South Carolina coming together and putting the hurting on somebody. You had a great game from Malaysia Fulwiley, 20 points. South Carolina does a good job on the boards, 31 rebounds to holding TCU to just 21. They really just zeroed in, I thought, on TCU stars. Sedona Prince, 3 of 8 from the floor, 6 points, just didn't really impact the game whatsoever. She gets into a little bit of foul trouble, has to sit on the bench for a little bit, but 6 points in 33 minutes, like you're not winning any games at TCU when Sedona Prince is putting that up. Haley Van Lith played okay, but they really zeroed in. Madison Connor, 5 points, not great. That's kind of your number 3 there at TCU. So I think that was just a classic throwback. That's what we're used to from a Dawn Staley, South Carolina, is just when they put the clamps on somebody on defense. And they own the glass. They hit the shots that were in front of them. And we even got a dunk from Ashlyn Watkins, which was awesome. So, yeah, they put the hurting on TCU.
A dunk after a steal from the other end of the floor. So Ashlyn Watkins is back. That's a huge development for South Carolina and a front court that I know both of us questioned their depth earlier in the season. Duke did pick up another nice win earlier in the week. We'll touch on that in the program as well. But first, let's round out our starting 5, Mitch, with that news bomb that you dropped, the Mitch bomb in the WNBA circles over the weekend. Could we see another college to the WNBA move at the head coaching position?
Maybe, yeah. I reported over the weekend that Lindsey Harding is among the top candidates for the Washington Mystics head coach opening. Former All-American at Duke. She was actually a finalist for the Duke job when it was open, when Kara Lawson got it. Back in 2020, that job goes to Kara, and Lindsey spends a few years, coaching around the NBA and the G League. She was the G League Coach of the Year last year. She's currently assistant coach for the Lakers. Lindsey Harding has been around coaching now for a while, pretty much ever since her career has ended, and she's wanted to be a head coach. Either she was a head coach in the G League. I think her next kind of target was doing so either in the WNBA or in women's college basketball. And she might get the opportunity with the Mystics, who is a team that she played for back when, during her playing days in the WNBA. 2 of her probably better seasons in the WNBA came with the Mystics in 2009, 2010. So I think this is a search that is kind of winding down. What's interesting to me about the search is that the Mystics are doing a head coaching and a GM search at the same time. So, there's not a GM involved in this search. And usually you hire the GM first, and then they hire the head coach, and the head coach reports to the GM, and so on and so forth. Which also, to that point, I'm interested in who made the decisions for the Mystics in terms of who they protected in this expansion draft. We just talked about Julie Van Loo, going to the Golden State Valkyries. So yeah, a lot of changes happening, for the Mystics. And yeah, we might know pretty soon who their head coach is. Lindsey Harding, again, is a top target. There's a couple other candidates at the top of the list, but she is very much in the mix and someone that could get the job.
So we've seen Carl Semesco go from Florida Gulf Coast to the Atlanta Dream. We've seen Lynn Roberts go from Utah. I was going to say Lindsey Reed. I'm getting the Lyns and the Lindsays confused. We saw Lynn Roberts go from Utah to the Los Angeles Sparks, another college to the WNBA. We've seen inter-WNBA movement with Stephanie White to the Indiana Fever. We're recording on December 9th. This podcast will drop December 11th. Hopefully they don't hire a coach between now and then. However, we still have multiple openings of the WNBA. It's fascinating to see. Could we see an NBA to WNBA move in the head coaching ranks? It's a fascinating time in women's basketball. Let's hit a couple more from the college front that we missed earlier just now, Mitch. We alluded to Notre Dame, the fact that they are still, as of this writing, behind Texas in the rankings, which makes absolutely no sense to me, considering it was one of the best games of the season, if not the year, in my opinion, when all is said and done. It goes to overtime in South Bend. Notre Dame pulls it out 80-70. For me, the image that I will remember most from this game is not Marcus Freeman with his weird haircut on the court side, in the courtside seats with his wife. It is not the snow falling outside in South Bend. It is the image of Olivia Miles and Hannah Hidalgo when Notre Dame allowed Texas to creep back into this game and to force overtime. And those two in the huddle started clapping like crazy, clapping like they were like, this is what we live for. We want this. We want the smoke. We're good. That spoke volumes to me from that game.
Yeah, I think the image that I'm going to remember is Hannah Hidalgo getting that steal and then falling down and throwing the ball behind her head from while she was seated on the floor somehow, and it landed in the midst of Olivia Miles for an easy layup. Yeah, it was just a clinic by Notre Dame, like really, really great game from them. Just kind of ran away with it there at the end and pulled away for a 10-point win. And like you look at the box score and it's like, man, so Notre Dame, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players. That's all they played, 6 players. And you look at Texas and it's like, wow, they played 12 or 10. I mean, so Notre Dame, like, again, like we've talked about this before, like they're dealing with injuries. It, for the most part, against Utah and TCU hasn't really mattered. Like, I think when you have Hannah Hidalgo and Olivia Miles in your starting lineup, you can get away with not playing, a whole lot of depth. Olivia Miles plays 41 minutes, Hannah Hidalgo 45. So yeah, they run away with it in overtime, outscoring Texas 12-2 in the extra period there. I was super impressed by Sonia Citron and the way she played.
Yes.
When you have her as kind of, not even your Robin, but like the third sort of super friend in the backcourt, she's putting up 18 points, 7 rebounds, and 7 steals. She was awesome. And then she followed that up against Syracuse with 25 points, 11 rebounds, 4 assists. Like, she was just awesome this past week for Notre Dame. So, like, when you have her kind of, doing her thing too, I mean, those three, when you talk about a trio of players, I don't know that there's any better in the country than Olivia Miles, Hannah Hidalgo, and Sonia Citron. So the rest of the roster, if those three are healthy, I don't know that it matters all that much. You want to have some inside presence, of course, but
which Kate Koval was 2 of 9 from the floor. That's not what you want, much like what we talked about with Iowa. Hannah Stolke can't go 1 of 8 or whatever she was this past weekend. I think what's going to be interesting is that it doesn't matter if it's Muffet McGraw coaching Notre Dame. It doesn't matter if it's Niele Ivey coaching Notre Dame. Notre Dame, injuries. How deep is this team? I feel like we have been having the same conversation since 2017, Mitch. I'm being entirely honest. It's different. The names on the back of the jersey are different. The names on the front and the storyline, it's the same. And yet here they are still in the top 10.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, hopefully they will get Maddie Westbeld back in the mix and they will get Lisa Carlin back in the mix. But we haven't seen them yet. And, they've been okay without them. Leah Tu King, played pretty well in both of those games. So, if you have her, you have Kate Koval. Koval's going to get better as the season goes along as a freshman. But again, like when you have those 3 guards, Hidalgo, Citron, Miles, like you can play with anybody.
You alluded to it earlier. Louisville lost a sleeper, quite literally. I think I fell asleep. I want to blame the SMU Clemson ACC championship for also happening at the same time. UConn 85, Louisville 52 from the Champions Classic in game 2 of that MTE over the weekend in Brooklyn. That, of course, comes on the heels of number 11 Oklahoma narrowly defeating Louisville 78-72. That's part of why the Cardinals fall out of this week's AP Top 25. Mitch, should we be worried about Louisville, or is this a wake-up call for one of the younger squads in the Power 5 conferences?
I don't know. I don't know if we should be worried about Louisville. I guess it depends on like how high your expectations were for them. I I didn't really see them as like a national championship contender this year. You know, like we've talked about before, it is a super young team. And so when you run into a juggernaut like Iowa, you might have a game like this where you're just outmatched and just not ready to play from the get-go when you have a super young team. And, you know, probably in a year or two or even maybe this season, you know, Louisville will be better for that, for getting exposed like this against UConn. I think Jeff Walls summed it up pretty well in his post-game press conference where he opened it by saying, we looked like shit. You know, Jeff is full of colorful language, as
We
we
can
come
cuss
to
on this
know.
podcast. It's fine. Everything's good.
Yeah, you know, a little bit, a couple 4-letter words here and there. But, you know, Jeff, he summed it up. They just did not look good, and they didn't look ready to play. So, you know, I think it's a little bit of both. Like it says a lot about Louisville, about like how much growth they still have to do. And also says a lot about UConn. They just, I mean, it was a clinic. They put the smackdown on them, and they won by 33 points, with Paige Beckers only scoring 8 of those points.
And with AZ Fudd banged up as well.
Yeah, AZ Fudd scores 18 points in 18 minutes and then, you know, gets a little knock and she has to leave the court. She does return to the bench, and she was seen laughing with Gino and stuff like that. So I think that she's okay. But yeah, didn't really play, you know, much of the second half.
Didn't matter.
No, didn't matter. Another great game from Sarah Strong, 21 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists. She was balling. Ashlyn Shade, you get 13 points from her. So yeah, I think it just speaks to like how good UConn really is this year. And like, if they stay healthy, I think they're right up there to contend for the national title. Louisville, you got some things to work on and some things to get together. But we knew that about Louisville coming into the season, that they were going to hit some bumps in the road like this, I think.
I forget who it was. It might have been Alexa Philippou from ESPN. Somebody tweeted it out that that right now, if you were to look at this UConn team and you were to say who's the best player on this roster, you could make an argument that, if only statistically speaking, Paige Beckers may be the bus driver, as many like to say, but Sarah Strong has been the best player. And she tweeted out, Sarah Strong is a top blank player in college basketball right now, which is a crazy thing to say for a true freshman, even if she plays for the Huskies.
Yeah, I mean, Sarah Strong so far this season, 8 games, 16.3 points, 7.6 rebounds, 3.6 assists, shooting 57.3% from the floor. And Paige Becker's numbers are a little bit better in the points and the assists, but they're pretty much right there with Sarah's everywhere else. And Sarah, of course, has a couple more rebounds than Paige. Yeah, I mean, this was, you know, like I've mentioned on this podcast before, I kind of got an up close look at North Carolina recruiting Sarah Strong last year really, really hard. And it really came down to North Carolina and UConn. And yeah, she was the number 1 player in the country last year in terms of high school recruits. And we're seeing why. We're seeing why she was so sought after and so valuable and spoken of in a way that kind of compared her to some of the Greeks. So, yeah, I mean, you know, I think somebody pointed out that, you know, Gino, while getting up there in age, signed a contract extension last year, and it might be because he's going to have Sarah Strong for the next couple seasons.
Figures they'll pick up a couple more rings. It's fine.
Yeah, we'll see if Sarah can bring a title back to UConn. It's wild. It feels like UConn is in like a title drought because of how, you know, how often they
it's
won.
Like the Yankees before 2000. Like, if
Right.
you didn't make it to the World Series every 2 to 3 years, it was a drought.
Mm-hmm. But it has been since 2016 now. That Iowa has won, or not Iowa, excuse me, UConn has won a title. So yeah, I mean, you know, you're creeping up to the decade mark here. I think Sarah Strong might have the chance to change that. And a healthy Paige Beckers and a healthy AZ Fudd, of course.
You already alluded, Mitch, to our friend Coach Yo and Ole Miss losing on the road at NC State. Man, what a week for the Triangle with the ACC SEC Challenge. I mean, I couldn't keep track of how many games were being played in those gyms in the North Carolina area over the last week plus. But final score, NC State 68, Ole Miss 61. Vindication. Is the year of the Wolf back on?
I don't know.
Because the men's team also picked up a pretty nice win in Raleigh last week as well.
They did. And yeah, I don't know. I sort of expected NC State to win this game, just because I think that NC State's guards are really good. So I think when they have games like this, where like you look at Ole Miss's roster, and they don't have that super imposing center, right? And we've talked all year long about NC State's problem is that they don't have the River Baldwin that they had last year. They don't even have a Mimi Collins. They don't have that combo that can really fight for them in the paint and get them rebounds. So when you look at NC State's losses this year, they lost to South Carolina, really good rebounding team. They lost to TCU. They have Sidonia Prince. They lost to LSU. They have Anissa Morrow. So when NC State isn't playing a team that doesn't have a really good or imposing inside presence, I think they're going to be fine. So you look at this Ole Miss game, and yeah, you had great games from Zoe Brooks, 19 points, 14 points from Zam Jones, Isaiah James, 11, Sanai Rivers, 10. All the guards doing their thing, contributing in their own ways, piling up assists. The guards did a nice job attacking the boards as well. Madison Hayes had 9 rebounds. You look at the rebounding margin in this game, NC State 45, Ole Miss 35, so they win the rebounding margin by 10. Mallory Collier got the nod at center in this game. She had 9 boards, which is a good progress from her. If she can keep improving as the season goes along, if she is the post player that they're going to lean on, that would be a good sign. But I still have questions about like when they play against, teams with really good post players. So Ole Miss, they're okay. We're going to see them play Louisville here very soon. That's a game that I think NC State should win on the road, just because you talk about the veteran experience of NC State versus the not that much experience of this young Louisville team. But Louisville is a team that does have good post players. So we'll see how that goes.
And we know they have good coaching as well, even if they played like doo-doo against UConn. One more from the week that was, Mitch. Toby Fournier drops 27 in the ACC opener. We mentioned it. We promised it. Here it is. Duke fans, you covered the spread against South Carolina. You also picked up a nice win over the Hokies and Virginia Tech. Hey, look, I think even with that loss to South Carolina, we can still say that the team of the first month of the women's college basketball season, the biggest surprise has been the Duke Blue Devils.
Yeah, and I mean those 2 losses that they have on their resume are losses to really, really good teams in their buildings. You lose at Maryland again, in a game where you missed 12 free throws, and then you go down to South Carolina and you hold them to their lowest rebounding total of the season. I mean, Duke took it to South Carolina. I think in that South Carolina game, you would have liked to have seen more from Reagan Richardson and from Toby Fournier, who have kind of been Duke's sort of top 2 players this year, along with Ashlyn Jackson. So you just needed a little bit more from them in that South Carolina game. I would be interested to see a rematch between Duke and South Carolina when we get to March on a neutral court. I think that would be a lot of fun. So yeah, Sunday I went to the Duke's game against Virginia Tech. It was their ACC opener. Covered that for the AP. It was a really good bounce back win from Duke. I think the thing that's standing out to me for Duke right now is we've talked a lot. I mean, ever since Kara Lawson took this job, she's tried to install a defensive identity and a defense first mindset into this team. They were great on defense last year, great on defense the year before. But what we're seeing this year is really the offense start to come along. We're seeing the assist numbers up. We're seeing the 3-point shooting percentage up. I wrote in my story yesterday for the AP, Duke entered that game ranking 15th nationally in 3-point shooting. They were 18th nationally in assists per game. Duke is now 5-0 when they shoot north of 40% from behind the arc. So they have a lot of good things working for them on offense right now. And yeah, Toby Fournier has been – she's giving them something that they just didn't have last season. And Kara Lawson talked a little bit about this yesterday. Not only is she just a fantastic scoring option off the bench, but she's, a post player who they can just dump the ball down into and ask her to go get a bucket. And 9 times out of 10, She does. She just battles down there. She's really good with her footwork. She knows, like, when she gets into the paint, she knows how to get around people to get to the rim. So she shoots 12-17 from the floor against Virginia Tech. I mean, this is her ACC debut. And Virginia Tech's not a bad team. We saw them battle against Iowa earlier this year. This was only their third loss of the season, and they have some good players. But Toby just owned them. She was awesome. She also hit a three-pointer at the end of the game, which was not ruled a three-pointer in the box score for some weird reason. I don't know how the refs got this one wrong. I mean, her foot was behind the line by a wide margin, but they didn't give her a three. So she ends up with a season-high 27 points instead of 28, and also had 9 rebounds, almost had a double-double. So, yeah, I think when you have Toby Fournier playing like this and Reagan Richardson also playing some of her best basketball, I mean, Duke is right up there with Notre Dame for me, and North Carolina maybe a few steps behind them in terms of, like, the contenders in the ACC this season.
Will any of those ACC teams make this week's Chef's Table? I know you wanted to talk Hawkeyes, Mitch. You kept mistakenly calling UConn Iowa, and I know that's because you are so excited for this week's appetizer, a game near and dear to my heart. I've covered it a time or two, the Cy-Hawk game this year at Carver Hawkeye Arena on the women's side.
Yeah, I'll just set this one up for you and get it out of the way here. Yeah, so our appetizer, the first game of the week that you want to check out as part of our Chef's Table, Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern on FS1. We got number 18 Iowa State, Audie Crooks & Co. at number 21 Iowa, Lucy Olson, Hannah Stalkey, Addie O'Grady, the whole crew there. Tell us about Iowa State and Iowa.
Yeah, this is a rivalry that obviously goes way back. On the women's side, in my opinion, it's maybe not as testy per se as the men's side, probably because, Lisa Bluter wasn't getting thrown out of games quite at the rate that Fran McCaffrey does these days, or at least historically speaking, we'll call it that. But no, this is a rivalry that in the grand landscape of women's basketball, I think needs to be talked about, Mitch, because up until this season, when Lisa Bluter retired and now her top lieutenant, Jan Jensen, steps in, Lisa Bluter and Bill Fenley are two of the longest tenured women's college basketball coaches in the country, let alone in the Big Ten or the Big 12. And so these are two people who have been recruiting against each other for 20 plus years before Bluter's retirement this past off season. And so it's a game that they know each other better than anybody. Kylie Feuerbach actually began her career at Iowa State. That certainly has to be a little fuel to the fire for her every time that these two teams come together. My personal favorite in this rivalry when it comes to storytelling, Jenny Baranczyk, that's the Drake game, excuse me. Jenny Baranczyk and Iowa had their little feud, but that came about a week and a half after Allie Disterhoff got ejected from, I believe that was the 2015 installment of the Cy-Hawk game at Hilton Coliseum. Allie Disterhoff got ejected for yelling and shouting. I think she fouled out anyway, so it wasn't actually considered an ejection. And then a week later, her and Jenny Baranczyk are having a war of words at Carver Hawkeye Arena. A lot of tensions flaring. People care about basketball in the state of Iowa. Everyone in the country should care about this game, though, especially when you consider, like we said, Hannah Stolke. Will she be more of a 4? Will the ascendance of Addie O'Grady allow Hannah Stolke to play off a little bit and be more of a stretch 4 as opposed to forcing her to play the 5, where she's unfortunately, for her sake, in my opinion, been miscasted as a center solely because Iowa has not had the productivity at center since Monica Sonano graduated 2 years ago. And you're going up against a tall task in Audie Crooks. This is going to be a massive opportunity for Addie O'Grady.
Yeah, big test for Addie O'Grady. I'm excited to see that battle inside. Speaking of rivalries, our entree this week is a big one. Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern on ESPN on the mothership. Number 2 UConn at Notre Dame, number 8 Notre Dame.
What did Notre Dame do to get all these marquee home games? I'm very impressed with the wizardry by Niele Ivey and crew.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened. This is a return game. Last year they played at UConn, and that was a game that I believe was a little bit later in the season. That was the game that Hannah Hidalgo also kind of like announced herself, as a kind of candidate for Freshman of the Year. And a candidate to be an All-American. Excited to see this one, especially if we get, we talk about health so much with these two teams. And like So to finally see both of them, hopefully at full strength, like if we get a game where UConn is playing Paige and AZ and Sarah Strong against Hannah, Olivia, and Sonia, this is just much watch TV. Like I'm going to be sitting in here watching this game on Thursday night, and I hope you all are too.
It's 7:00 too. Thursday Night Football doesn't start until 8:25, folks. So make sure you're locked in. Get to that first half, get a second TV. Double screen viewing is the way to go because that will be a good one. And for dessert, Mitch, I'm excited to hear more about a team that I know you alluded to is in your AP ballot this week and you believe is on the rise.
Yeah, this is Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern on ACC Network, and I will be at this game. This is number 25, Georgia Tech, at number 14, North Carolina. Georgia Tech has kind of, they've been a team sort of, we don't see this a lot in like today's college basketball because of the transfer portal and everything else, but they really like developed, a couple really good players in Kara Dunn and Tony Morgan, who are now juniors, I believe. And yeah, both of them juniors. They have a good freshman in Danny Carnegie. They've really just put together a solid season there. Under Nell Fortner, who I always enjoy talking to at ACC Media Days and after games and stuff. Yeah, Georgia Tech has been on a roll so far this season. Like I said, they're 9-0, they're undefeated, and they have some good wins. They beat South Dakota State by 14 points. They beat Oregon by 16 points. They beat Mississippi State in the ACC SEC Challenge this past week. So yeah, it's looking like a really good season for the Yellow Jackets there in the flats. This will be their ACC opener here against North Carolina. North Carolina's ACC opener as well. So I think this is going to be a good defensive battle. This was a good game last year down in Atlanta, a game that Nell Fortner actually missed because she was under the weather. But I was there as I kind of followed North Carolina around all season. Yeah, Georgia Tech, really efficient offensive team this year. They're 7th in assist turnover ratio. And they're also lost the stat 20th in 3-pointers made this year, which is really good. So Georgia Tech, fun team, kind of flying under the radar, but ranked in the AP Top 25 poll this week. Should be a good game against North Carolina.
And if that wasn't appetizing enough, folks, Mitch is back with another installment of Making Money with Mitch. We promise this week's pick's a little bit better than last week's slate.
We hope so. So yeah, on the season so far, we're 3-3, so we're even money. We're not losing money yet, so that's good. So yeah, this week the picks are Saturday, 5 p.m. Eastern on the Big Tent Network. Kentucky is at Purdue. Right now I'm seeing the line at Kentucky -1.5. I will ride with the Wildcats to bounce back and to beat Purdue by at least 2 points. So that is something that I would seize on. I think Kentucky will get its act together and bounce back after that loss in North Carolina.
How good is Purdue? I haven't heard anything about the Boilermakers up to this point this year.
That's a good question. I don't think Purdue.
I know they got run out of the building by Notre Dame. I'm looking at their schedule. They're 5-4. Their losses are to Notre Dame, which I remember popping in on that game briefly. They lost to South Carolina, popped in on that game virtually from the box score because it was on Baller TV during an MTE during Thanksgiving. That was the second 40-point win that the Gamecocks had over the Thanksgiving weekend. They lost to Maryland 78-69. They narrowly lost to Middle Tennessee 54-49. Their wins are over Purdue, Fort Worth, IU Indy, Bellarmine, UT Arlington, Maine.
Yeah. And they actually led Maryland at halftime.
They're 1.5 point. Kentucky's only a 1.5 point favorite. That's
right.
Curious. Very curious.
Again,
even in West Lafayette, which is a sinkhole. So maybe they're worried that Kenny Brooks and company are going to sink it to the earth.
Yeah, and maybe it's the thing where they did lead Maryland by double digits at one point in that game, wound up losing. But so maybe it's a little bit of that, that Purdue home court advantage. But yeah, I think Kentucky's going to bounce back in a big way, and they should win this game fairly comfortably. So if you see this line at 2.5 points or less, right now it's 1.5. I would seize on the Wildcats.
Speaking of Middle Tennessee, is that who I see next up in your picks?
Yeah. So this is another Saturday game. This is 6 p.m. Eastern on ESPN Plus. Middle Tennessee State is playing against Kansas State. And right now Kansas State is an 11.5 point favorite. I think Kansas State's a good team, but I also think that Middle Tennessee is like pretty good. If you remember last year, they upset Louisville in the NCAA tournament. They've, you look at their losses this season, they really haven't lost any bad teams. They lost to Tennessee, they lost to Iowa State, they lost at Belmont. So I think that, if they're underdogs by like 12 points, I like them to cover in this one. I think they'll give Kansas State a good fight. This is on a neutral court. I like the Blue Raiders. I think that they'll show some fight in this game and give Kansas State a little bit of a scare. They do have a lot of players back from that team last year that upset Louisville in the first round of the NCAA tournament. So yeah, I like Middle Tennessee State to give Kansas State a good fight and keep this game competitive.
This is also now justifying why it's a 1.5 point line, Mitch, between Purdue and Kentucky, because we look at Purdue's losses and we say Notre Dame, top 10 team, South Carolina, top 10 team, Maryland, top 10 team, Middle Tennessee, just saying,
right.
Good teams win, great teams cover. Mitch has the Blue Raiders covering against the Big 12's K-State Cats. Sunday, 1:00. Who is your final game of the weekend that our friends can make some money with?
Yeah, this is the ACC opener for NC State and Louisville. This is Sunday, 1:00 on ABC. So, big television window for both of these teams. NC State ranked this week back in the AP poll at number 22. This game is at Louisville at the Yum Center. Right now, I'm seeing NC State as a 2.5 point favorite. I like that line. I think NC State is going to go into Louisville and win. I just think that the experience will win out. I think, having Sanaya Rivers and Isaiah James on your side in a game like this, where Louisville is just, trying to recover from that loss to UConn. Lots of young players, like I said. I think Mallory Collier can hold her own against Olivia Cochran. But I think this is going to be a good close game, but I like NC State to cover 2.5 and win.
The year of the wolf, folks. Never say never. It could be back on. Any last call plugs, shout outs for you, Mitch, as we put a puppy on or put a bow on this episode?
I have a disappointment that I would like to note.
Okay.
I think a lot of people this season thought that this was going to be the year that Virginia took a step forward under Coach Mox. They really built some good momentum last year. Towards the end of the season, they beat North Carolina and beat Virginia Tech at home. Filled John Paul Jones Arena, really great atmosphere. It felt like momentum was building in the right direction. And I look at their record and I don't really understand what's going on there. I'm going to have to take a closer look at Virginia, but if we were to believe that they were going to take a step forward this year and maybe make the NCAA tournament or at least finish the season with a winning record, you can't lose to Wyoming on a neutral court. You can't lose to Washington State on a neutral court. You can't lose to Auburn and Boston College at home. So that's just kind of my takeaway. I'm kind of disappointed that Virginia isn't better like a lot of people thought they would be. They're riding a 4-game losing streak at the moment, and it just hasn't been the start to a season that the Cavaliers would want. Kamora Johnson is playing great. I think they need some other players to step up, and if they don't, ACC play is going to be really rough for them. Their next ACC game is at Notre Dame. That is going to be an ugly game, I think. So Virginia, it's getting late early.
I would like to shout out the ACC on the women's side for holding it down in the SEC ACC challenge. I understand Oklahoma, 11th ranked, they take down Louisville. Duke, you go up against the likes of South Carolina. It's the way the cookie crumbles. A great game between Stanford and LSU goes the Tigers' way. But ultimately, to see North Carolina come out victorious, to see Notre Dame, I know people don't want to say they're part of the ACC, but they are. To see NC State, to see Cal with a top 25 upset. Yes, that's the Atlantic Coast Conference. Great. Cal Bears now 8-1 on the season. Just wanted to shout out the women's side because the discourse, not only on the men's side, but also in football right now, Mitch, with regards to SEC bias and is the ACC even a competitive Power 5 conference anymore? It's just so the discourse has reached all-time highs. So thank you to women's basketball for holding down the fort for us.
Yeah, Cal has been a good surprise this year in the ACC. I think I ranked them in my AP poll this week. They're playing really really well, and I think this is the year that they take that big step forward under Sharman Smith. I mean, you look at their resume; their only loss so far is to Michigan State on a neutral court by 6 points. They won at Gonzaga, they beat Auburn, they beat Arizona, and they beat Alabama, who was ranked, before this week. So big game coming up against Stanford. That's on December 13th. So that is certainly a game to watch. I believe that's Friday night, and I believe, unfortunately, it is on ACC Network Extra. So that's a streaming only option.
We get them off the Pac-12 network, and we still can't watch them.
I don't get it. So if you can,
at least USC and UCLA are now on legitimate actual networks.
At least it's not Flow Hoops or Baller TV, I suppose.
Long live Baller TV. I want to shout out Alicia Clark and the veterans for the Las Vegas Aces. They took Kate Martin to a show in Vegas in her final weekend. I'm sure it's not her final weekend, but I guess in light of the WNBA expansion draft, Instagram stories were hilarious. The TikToks were hilarious. They're crying. They're going to miss the glue. We love this for the glue, though, as Mitch alluded to earlier. The fact that Kate Martin, a player who didn't even know she was going to play in the WNBA, is now, at least at this juncture, the face of a brand new WNBA franchise, is a story arc that I did not see coming in 2023, 2024.
I will miss Kate Martin and Asia Wilson's pregame handshake thing where they did, the noggin from Finding Nemo. Yeah. Gonna miss that. That was awesome.
Yeah, that was good times.
Shout out to Kate Martin.
Shout out to Kate Martin. Shout out to Alicia Clark. Shout out to you for listening to the Women's Basketball Podcast. Mitch, what's on the docket for you this week? Where can folks find you?
Yeah, on the socials at Primetime Mitch or Blue Sky. I believe I'm just Northam 67 there. So check that out, where I'm posting kind of the same things that I am on Twitter. But Blue Sky has been a much healthier place so far. And you can find me at North Carolina Public Radio, where today I got to write about the possibility of Bill Belichick coming to the Triangle. We'll
would be great for the brand. North Carolina women's basketball is on the rise. Maybe we get Bill courtside. I don't know. I think that could be good for the brand.
Yeah. Courtney Banghart is a Boston Celtics fan. I don't know if she's a New England Patriots fan. I know that one of her sons is a Baltimore Ravens fan, so I'm not entirely sure how a Belichick hire would sit in the Banghart household. But nonetheless,
talk to Courtney and report back next week.
It would certainly cause a circus in Chapel Hill that would be interesting, to say the very least.
Having covered He Who Must Not Be Named, Urban Meyer, here in Jacksonville, be careful what you wish for. I am at Mia O'Brien TV on X, Twitter. I have not left the cesspool yet. Follow me along there. Going to be on the call of a couple different high school games on 1010XL this week. Going to be covering UNF taking on UNC Asheville on the women's side Saturday, and then the men's side, a doubleheader at UNF Arena on Saturday. He's Mitch. I'm Mia, saying so long from the Women's Basketball Podcast. We will catch you next week.
Deuces.